Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to the Midday magazine. My name is Burhan, and today we're going to be talking about Islamic scholarship in the UK. It's a subject which I'm particularly interested in. This is why I chose it. And I've got a couple of really good guests, and I hope you will call in and join us and talk about what it means to be an Islamic scholar in the UK, where you can study, what kind of areas you might study, what career path you could follow, what it means to be an imam, a scholar, a sheikh, what these terminologies actually mean. Please do join us. We are live streaming on Facebook and on YouTube. We are on 87.9 FM in the London area, and you can join us on ramadanradio.org. And you can call us in, text us, WhatsApp us, or call and join us. The number is 077 614 60614, 077 614 60614. And I'd like to introduce my two guests. We have Dr. Shahrul Hussain, who is the Director of Research at the Ibn Rushd Center of Excellence for Islamic Research. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shahrul.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And we are joined by Ustadh Farhan Mahmood, Dean of Education at the Q Iman Institute for Arabic and Islamic Sciences. Assalamu alaikum, Farhan.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
And before I begin our discussion, just two quick things. We did try to get a female representation of scholarship on the show as well, for the people who are wondering why we've got two men as guests and one man as presenter. Very conscious of that, and we do want to explore that area as well. I found it quite difficult, I must admit. Maybe I could have put in more effort. But if you are somebody out there who has done formal Islamic learning or is an alima, and you want to join this discussion, please do phone in, and you can just ad hoc become a guest on the show. I'd be more than happy to have you involved, no problem whatsoever. Or if you want to just ring in with your views or text in with your views on this subject, then please do so. And the second thing is, before we go into our discussion, I just want to give a mention to the situation in Al-Aqsa at the moment. I want all the brothers and sisters out there to make dua. Keep them in your hearts, keep them in your minds, keep them in your sadaqah, keep them in your awareness, in your speech. And if anybody from that area and that land is listening, you should know that you are with us and we are with you, and you are not forgotten. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. I'll start with Dr. Shahrul. You study in the UK Islamic sciences, and then you went to Al-Azhar as well. And this is kind of a path which is seen as quite typical. And it's also seen as the preserver of a certain type of person, somebody who possibly comes from a scholarly background. Maybe their father, their mother was a scholar, their grandfather, etc. They come from that kind of lineage. Or, if I may say, it's seen as the preserve as like a secondary career choice. It's maybe seen as a career choice or a academic choice of people who are not that well educated, or seen as, I'm not going to become a professional, so I may as well become an imam or something like that. What would you say about that sort of view?
Yeah, regarding the second bit, ouch. Yeah, no, I think you've encapsulated the both themes perfectly well. You're right. It does either come from either a family legacy where there were father or grandfathers or parents who were within the Islamic tradition. So that's why the later generation, they followed suit, and there's many examples of that. And the second one is, you're absolutely spot on. It is where people perhaps don't really find another career path, and they tend to do this as a vocational thing, which then leads on to something else. So you are right. But things are changing, especially within the United Kingdom. I think the situation is more or less the same in the Indo-Pac in particular. But other parts of the world is slightly changing. It's different for me. I don't come from a family who has a scholarship or scholarly background, and I wasn't given a choice. My parents just put me in an Islamic seminary, and things changed from there.
Okay, and Brother Farhan, you studied over here, not abroad, I believe.
Yeah.
And the opportunities over here to follow that route. Again, not only did you study in the UK, it's kind of breaking this tradition, if you like, or this perception that you have to study abroad, but also you studied law first, right? So you again, you're breaking that cycle somewhat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my experience first was in law, and then I did a master's in management consultancy. And to be honest, my life was actually changed by reading one book, Muhammad Asad's Road to Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
I finished that book and I thought, I have to study Islam. And in the beginning, I did try. I tried to apply to Medina, but I was a lot older. I was married at the time, had a child, and they don't take students who are older. And to be fair, I never really followed up the application. And then I found Ibrahim College.
Right.
I came and I studied at Ibrahim College, and I'm in hindsight, I'm grateful that I stayed in the UK and I studied. And the main reason for that is because the scholars who taught us, our teachers, they've studied far and wide, right? Some of us, like Sheikh Muhammad Spini, he studied with the Grand Mufti of Syria for 14 years. So he comes with a lot of experience, mashallah. We had our local asatidha, Maulana Shams, Maulana Mujahid, Maulana Ashraf, amazing people, right? Just to name a few, who gave us not just the deen, but also how to apply the deen in our context.
Yeah.
That's the most valuable thing that you can get is not just some raw data and just sitting there reading the books, as amazing as they are, and gaining those usul, but also having the ability to then apply those usul. And I've had the pleasure, alhamdulillah, of traveling to Mecca and Medina multiple occasions, generally speaking, taking trips there. And we've had some access to teachers there as well and students there. And I can proudly say that a standard Ibrahim College grad can stand toe to toe with an Azhari and Madani grad. And in some areas, even have greater proficiency. And I mean that I'm coming from a humble position. But I'm glad that we're able to produce that level of scholarship in the UK. And I would really urge students before they make the decision to make a life-changing plan to go abroad and put their whole life on hold. First, explore the scholarship in your locality. This is the sunnah of the ulama of the past. They would first exhaust the scholarship of their locality, then they would go abroad. Because it does differ. The urf of the people does have an impact on you. And
could you explain the word urf?
The customs of the people does have an impact on how our law is applied. This is central to all of the madhahib, if you study it deeply, especially from an usuli perspective. I'd also just like to add, it's not just about going abroad. I mean, you'll find this with students who are isolated, away from the community for half a decade, right? You'll see that what happens is they fail to sort of connect with their own community. You've been away for 10 years, you come back, they're not relatable to you anymore. And that's a big challenge to bridge. Alhamdulillah, many scholars who've come from abroad have done amazing work.
Yeah.
They've built these institutions, they've connected with us, but we'll see that that's not always the case.
Yeah.
And when we've got all of these amazing individuals who have come here and set up these institutions and the teaching, I think that's where the journey begins, really and truly.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Sharrell, I mean, it's a really key point, isn't it, around the local context and making sure that you have connection with your local community. And I think from a research point of view, the Ibn Rushd Center is something which is directly involved with that.
That's correct. We can't deny or disregard the importance of being well entrenched and well rooted into communities and community affairs, especially the context and the reality of whatever social milieu that you live in. One thing I would perhaps add, and what Sheikh Farhan said has a lot of merit, but one of the, shall I say, drawbacks. Everything in life has a pro and con. It has a positive and a negative attribute to it. So one of the positives of going abroad is that you don't restrict yourself to a particular dimension or a particular pedagogy of learning and teaching. You're exposed to different ways, and this is from personal experience. So after graduating in traditional Islamic seminaries, I won a scholarship to go to Al-Azhar, and it was really a culture shock for me. Wow, a complete different style of teaching, a complete different syllabus, a complete different approach. And this broadens your horizon. It makes you a more rounded person and more sympathetic to different situations and different views as well. And I think that's much needed.
And we saw that, right, in the past. I know we always keep harking back to the past, but there's probably a reason for that. But we do find that scholars did, when they did formal studying, they would travel around. They, as Brother Farhan said, they would start in their locality, but then they would go and sit with a scholar and learn in Damascus. They would go to Baghdad. They would go somewhere else. And so this is not something new and also surprising.
That's absolutely spot on. That's one thing that I was just going to say. This term is known as rihla, or journey, and especially it's important to the science of hadith. And I think one of the scholars, I mean, many scholars have been criticized for various things, but one of the scholars has really escaped criticism, and kind of like everybody agrees that, well, there is very, very little criticism about him, is Imam Malik. So every other scholar has something that scholars have said, well, he's not like that, or he's like this. But Imam Malik escaped all this. But one thing people did say about Imam Malik is that he didn't do the rihla. Okay, he didn't have the journey. He didn't go out of Medina in pursuit of hadith from the different seats of learning. So I'm not saying it's a must, and I agree with you what Sheikh Farhan said. I think what he said was absolutely valid. But also there is an added benefit in going abroad and being exposed to another culture, being exposed to another pedagogy, and that's important as well.
Okay, so just to give people an idea of what it means to do Islamic studies, right? So most people will understand that you do GCSEs, you do A-levels, they know that what it entails. They know that if you do a degree course, you know, it's 3 years, you do a foundation year, you go into some specializations in your second year, then you have your final year. Maybe you do a master's, you have a dissertation, you do a PhD, you have, you know, et cetera, et cetera. People generally know that course. I don't think the majority of people out there know, I mean, I don't know, what is an Islamic studies course entail. Do you start off doing a foundation year in hadith or usul or Islamic sciences? How does it work? And maybe Brother Farhan, you could give us a breakdown of that.
Yeah, I think it differs vastly depending on where you're studying. We don't have, unfortunately, in the UK, I don't think anybody can say we have a unanimous pedagogy or unanimous system of delivery when it comes to Islamic education. What I will say is the most prevalent, especially amongst the subcontinent community, is a Dars Nizami system. And this system was very popular, obviously, from Deoband and Darul Nadwa and that line of thinking. Mm-hmm. But it finds its roots back to Imam Ghazali. We see that, right? And the first step to that is first learning the Arabic language. And in the subcontinent, they don't just teach you the Arabic language, they'll teach you Farsi, they'll teach you Urdu, because so many of the kutub, so many of the books are written in those languages. Mm. Once the student has proficiency in Arabic, then they go on to what you'd call the Alimiya program. Now, again, it's multi-layered, and there's a lot of depth to that, which I'm not going to get into. But to put it simply, it's about 7 years, and it's pretty much like a foundation, intermediate, and advanced program, all put together. And then the final year, you have what we call Dawratul Hadith, where you do all 6 books and you get your accreditation. Now, the dilemma here is the Prophet ﷺ gave the deen to us as one homogeneous deen. Mm. He didn't teach the Sahaba usul al-fiqh. He didn't teach Imam al-Shafi'i's Risala, right? Mm. He gave the Quran and the Sunnah. The ulama later developed the sciences. And the thing is, because they're so intrinsically connected, you're forced to study everything. In the Dars Nizami system, a bit of everything.
Okay.
So, and I'll put it in 3 ways. This is how we structure our program as well. You have primary subjects, subsidiary subjects, and what I would call ad hoc subjects. Your primary subjects are what? Tafsir al-Quran, tafsir of the Quran, hadith, and fiqh. Then you have the subsidiary subjects to each primary subject. For tafsir al-Quran, you have ulum al-Quran and usul al-tafsir, which is tafsir sciences.
Okay.
Hadith, you have mustalah al-hadith, which is hadith sciences. These are access sciences to the primary sciences. And then for fiqh, you have usul al-fiqh. So if fiqh is jurisprudence or law, then usul al-fiqh is the legal theory behind that law. And likewise, you have then the ad hoc sciences like seerah, tarikh, history, iman, aqidah, matters pertaining to creed and dogma. You'll have grammar, Arabic grammar, advanced Arabic grammar, you'll have rhetoric. And the thing is, if you want to sit down and study an amazing book like Tafsir Ibn Juzay, which is known as Tanzil, phenomenal book. You study that book, you're not going to understand it unless you've dabbled in all of those sciences.
Right.
Right. So how the Dars Nizami system works is it will give you a bit of everything, but it will start at a foundation level. Then you will do the same thing again at an intermediate level. So take fiqh, for example. Generally speaking, you'll do a book like Nur al-Idah and Quduri, which is a Hanafi primer in Hanafi law. And it's very basic text. But now you want to learn about the evidences. So then you do a book called Al-Hidayah by Imam Marghinani. Now that is Hanafi law with the evidences now, with the all the rationale. How does the scholar arrive at this conclusion? Where did he get this from? Where is the Quranic ayah? Where is the hadith? Where is the principle here? And then you'll go on and you'll study various other books until you get to the Dawratul Hadith program. And in the Hadith program, the idea is to study Bukhari cover to cover, and dabble in all the other books. That depending where you study, some do all 6 books cover to cover. A lot of the time it's maqra meaning you just read it, and then whatever your eye catches. But then you have extensive detailed study of, say, Bukhari and Muslim or Tirmidhi, and that then exposes you to the other madhahib.
Okay.
I'll just like to add one last thing. What's happening now, we're seeing a slight shift in those who are delivering the Dars Nizami system in a modern setting, where you can see that it's not just aimed at the subcontinent student, the Hanafi student, but it's broadening up now, where the other madhahib, we're being forced to dabble into it. And that's a result of the multicultural society that we live in. I just thought
no, that's a really good point, because that's the point I was going to pick up on, actually. And I'll go, I'll maybe come back to that in a second. But Dr. Shahril, is that an experience that you can, that resonates with you with your studying in Al-Azhar?
Al-Azhar is a different syllabus altogether. So the reason why it's slightly different is simply because we are non-Arabs trying to learn Arabic language. So remember, the idea of studying Islamic studies is to attain a level of scholarship. So in Islamic theology, now that requires understanding the primary sources of Islam, which, if we like, we can say it's the Quran, and we can say it's the Hadith, and it's fiqh. So to attain scholarship, you need a certain level of mastery or understanding of those 3. Now, in order for us to understand that, we need to and to get to an advanced level, we need to have a foundation and build on that foundation. And that's what Sheikh Farhan was talking about in terms of laying a foundation of Arabic grammar, morphology, rhetoric, literature, and et cetera, all to assist in understanding and accessing those 3 primary sources at an advanced level.
And you both mentioned Arabic language and coming from a non-Arab background, Dr. Shahril. So what level of scholarship, if at all, can one attain without Arabic?
Okay. Well, that might go into kind of like a slight controversy, and I don't know, Sheikh Farhan might strongly disagree with me. Look, in academia, and I come from an academic background, and sometimes, with all due respect to some of my colleagues in academia, some of the conferences that I attend at some of the universities, and it just leaves me dumbstruck, where certain people have even got professorship, and yet they don't know Arabic, and they are using certain terminologies that they don't really understand, and sometimes it's incorrect. University of Gloucester is a good example. I don't want to go into that exactly now, but another one another point is that because they don't have access to, they don't understand Arabic, they can't access the sources directly. So they rely on what we call secondary or tertiary sources.
Yeah.
And once you do that, you've diluted, because that understanding might be slightly different, and then you're dependent on somebody else's interpretation of a primary source, and that's seriously problematic. Without Arabic and trying to attain scholarship, it's I just don't agree with it.
Farhan, do you violently agree with Dr. Shahril, or are you largely in agreement with him on that?
I'm not sure why Dr. Saab would think I would disagree. As a student of knowledge, and one thing that Ibrahim College was a beacon of Arabic knowledge, of Arabic grammar, of literature, mantiq, balagha. I vehemently agree with him that I think it's a tragedy, to be honest with you, to try. Look, don't get me wrong. You don't have to be an expert in the Arabic language to be a good Muslim. Yeah, we can still teach fiqh, we can still teach hadith, we can still teach tafsir, but there will always be a barrier without the Arabic language. Yeah. Myself and Ustadh Shabir, he's one of the teachers' colleagues. We did a Juz Amma course this Ramadan. Every day after suhoor, we were doing 1 hour. Alhamdulillah, we did a khatam today, this morning. And I'll tell you, students always ask, Ustadh, what can I read? And if I start listing the English resources, there's not that many. I can count them in my hands. You come to the Arabic resources, you can have libraries full of books. And the thing is, you're not going to understand unless you understand the Arabic language. Take Usul al-Fiqh, for example. Usul al-Fiqh is a big chunk of it is Dalalatul al-Alfadh wal-Ma'ani, which is what? Hermeneutics. How to understand the Quran. All of that is linked with Arabic.
Sure.
What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mean when he says this? How do we extrapolate a obligation or a prohibition from the Quran? You have to understand how verbs are used, right? We say in Arabic, al-amru yufidu al-wujub, right? Al-nahyu yufidu al-tahrim. That if you have a command, a verbal command, which is generally a built on the imperfect verb, we call it the imperative verb. That results in an obligation, sometimes. I'll say most of the time. Or if you have a prohibition, that's usually an imperfect verb. That results in a prohibition, right? So, as in, how are you going to really, truly appreciate that if you've not studied the Arabic language? And I'd just like to add, one other problem is, what some students do is, they'll study Arabic at a basic level, and then they'll think that we're prepared to now deal with more. No, you need to study it at a far deeper level. There's an obsession with speaking Arabic. I say to my students, don't study Arabic just so you can say yani after every sentence. That's not studying Arabic. Yani, we can speak Arabic, don't get me wrong, but our focus is not colloquial Arabic. It's Fusha. It's classical Arabic. Yes. I've met students that have gone to Masr and Syria, all of these places, come back after 8 months, they can have a decent colloquial conversation, open the Quran, they still can't understand a word. Yeah. This is mushkila kabir. This is a big problem. Our purpose should be to study first and foremost the Quran and Sunnah. So that requires a number of years of studying Arabic, going deep into it, the grammar, studying classical poetry. It's very important. It's like in English. You study Shakespeare. You don't study Shakespeare because of the content. That's not the point. The point is to be exposed to that level of Arabic. So when we were studying Arabic with our teacher, Sheikh Mujahid Ali, this guy, mashallah, he's memorized 1,000 lines of poetry in Arabic, right? Every time he gives us example, he gives us one bait, one couplet, right? Or one misra. Misra means like a stanza. And he'd touch on classical poetry, Quran. That's how you learn, because you begin to learn phrases and expressions. That's what the Quran uses. The Quran was revealed to the Quraysh at a time when they had reached the pinnacle of Arabic language. And often the ulama say, how are you going to appreciate it if you don't study the language of that locality? And that's why I think Arabic is fundamental to your studies.
Thank you very much. You're listening to the Midday magazine with Burhan, and we are talking about Islamic scholarship in the UK. Please do join us. We are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube, and you can text in, call in, or WhatsApp into the studio with your questions, comments, join in the discussion. The number is 077 614 60614. 077 614 60614. We have about 25 minutes or so left. And one thing I just wanted to touch upon next is you've both described kind of the type of learning which happens in these institutions, and Brother Farhan, you in detail you talked about the various areas, and they're all interlinked. So what happens at the end? What do you get at the end of this? Is there a point at which you specialize in an area, because everything is interlinked? But there must be, some people are experts in fiqh, some people are experts in theology, in seerah, etc. At what point do you specialize, and what's the badge you get at the end? I'll maybe Dr. Shahril, you can have a crack.
I think that's a lovely question. It reminds me of a hadith, and anybody who starts to think that a piece of paper reflects his scholarship really needs to stop and perhaps think again. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man humani la yashba'an." I'll just say the English translation says there are two types of greedy people who are never sated, who are never satisfied and never full. They said the one who is greedy for the dunya, he will never be full. So a person who's got 1 million will aspire for 2, a person got 1 billion will aspire for 2, and so on. And he said the other greedy person is a person who's greedy for knowledge. And he will never be sated with the amount of knowledge he consumes. And it's so true. If anything learning teaches you is how little you know. The more you study, the more you know that, oh gosh, I really don't know anything. Oh my gosh. And it's really that. And 6 years I took to do my doctorate. And it was on commercial contractual law. And I can tell you this, without being humble or anything like that, after 6 years, just a tiny portion of commercial contractual law that I know. You understand? Contractual law is still so vast, and it's just amazing. So what badge do you get at the end of it? It just depends on what setting you really come from. They sometimes give the title of Maulana in the Indian subcontinent, and rather than the actual institution conferring some kind of accolade on you, it's what people usually call you in recognition of perhaps your scholarship, rather than any degrees that you get. Unless it's a Western academic title, then obviously that's something different.
Okay, well, I'll get onto the titles in a second, because that was part of our discussion as well. So we have a caller who's joining us. We have Brother Talha on the line. Assalamu alaikum, Talha. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for joining us. Do you have a question or a comment for our guests?
Well, I want to avoid being long-winded. I did want to engage with both of your guests. I was very happy that they're on. I looked up your guests, and I was very impressed by their work, and I'm very impressed by what they're saying. So basically, what I wanted their advice about, and I was going to get in touch with them privately, but I thought maybe it would benefit other people listening as well, to share it. What I wanted advice about is my own situation, and so just to avoid a long-winded autobiography. So I graduated in Arabic. I lived in Damascus for 2 years. This is between 2000 and 2003. Just to give specifics, so I did Sharh of Ibn Aqil when I was in Damascus. I did Sharh of Al-Zawzani and Tibrizi and the Mu'allaqat, right? I never finished my memorized Quran. It's something I'm sort of finishing off with Al-Jazari now, revising it. And I just wanted so I'm like 40 now. I'm doing a PhD, second year of my PhD. I'm looking at the history of the Hanabila. And so I've never formally studied Sharia. I've dabbled. I've been a dilettante. But I would like to have a formal recognition of studying Sharia at Ibrahim College. When I looked at Ibrahim College, I was very impressed by it. I've been very impressed by its graduates. I know some of their staff personally, and I looked at the 8-year part-time program. I thought maybe that would be good for me. And the other idea I was thinking of doing after my PhD to go at Azhar. Oh, and I've spoken to some scholars there, but they advised against it currently because of the situation there. So, I mean, I don't want to preach. I'm not a people's person. I don't want to answer people's tedious questions on marriage and divorce, but I would like to comment on public affairs, on culture, on history, because I see many IT graduates going to study Sharia and engineers and doctors, but I actually see very few people in humanities who understand these subtleties. So maybe I'll bring up follow-up things. Maybe I'll bring up follow-up comments and questions and afterwards. But I don't know what your guests would have to say, and I really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you for that. Do you Dr. Shahril, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I think it's really admirable from Brother Talha to pursue and be in the pursuit of knowledge. So my advice would be continue. Regarding the following up, or doing a PhD, I think he's currently in year 2 in some area about Hanbali fiqh. It's really good, but what I would advise is that in order to have some grounding, there is a need to have in Islamic scholarship. There is a need to have that grounding of Islamic sciences, the tafsir, the hadith, and fiqh beyond the rudimentary level. It needs to be something more advanced, especially when you're a PhD holder in Islamic studies. And especially in Hanbali fiqh, which is very interesting, and be really interesting to speak to him. But that title is really important, and I would advise him to see whatever institutions are available and see what he can do in terms of pursuing that and continuing it.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Talha, for your call. And if you wish to join us with a question or comment, you can call in or text in. It's 077 614 60614. We have about 15-20 minutes left, so let's move on a little bit because we've still got a lot to cover. It's a really fascinating discussion. We've had a few more questions which have come in, which I will pose to Brother Farhan. First question is, how do you go about choosing a course in Islamic scholarship? It's a good question. When presumably they all have different perspectives, different ideas, different opinions. Maybe some are, as the brother mentioned, there are Hanbali courses. Maybe there are different schools. They have different emphases, whether it's on theology or on usul, etc. And you yourself mentioned that there's a standard route, but I assume if there's a standard route, there are non-standard routes as well. So what would you advise that people should do when looking to choose a course?
So, all right. So the first thing is, I think this is important to mention, is that Islamic education is going through a paradigm shift. We're seeing an influx of different types of people coming into Islamic education, which we didn't see traditionally. So, I mean, just from our perspective, our age group tends to be between 20 and 35. That's a broad category. Most of them tend to be working professionals or students at universities who come and study with us because our program is catered for them, that you can work and study at the same time. Now, a lot is changing, the way it's delivered, the languages in which it's delivered, and all of that is changing. And when you as a student go and you're looking for where to study, you have to take these things into consideration. I think one thing that's not spoken about is the practical element. This is very important. It's sometimes not practical to put your life on hold and do a full-time course. Sometimes it's not practical to go abroad. Personally speaking, if you ask me, I would suggest at some stage, everybody should go abroad. As Imam Shafi'i said, fresh water, or rather water that's running remains fresh. Water that remains becomes stagnant. Same thing with knowledge. However, having said that, look at your situation. Look at your relationship with your mother and your father. Look at your situation with your spouse and your children. You can't just abandon everything and go into Islamic scholarship. Jannah is not awarded due to Islamic scholarship. It's awarded due to your intention, your sacrifice for the sake of your parents, for the sake of the deen. That's what Jannah is awarded for. Gaining is a proficiency, well, I would say scholastic literacy in Islamic education. That's not A, required for everybody. B, those who do want to do it, start locally, think about your circumstances. There are multiple modular programs. I can do a little bit of Arabic here, a little bit of tajweed here, perhaps a fiqh program here, once a week, a couple of hours. I think that's a fantastic place to start.
Yeah.
That inspiration. One Ustadh Shabir, I mentioned it before, he's got an organization called Faith. Fantastic organization where people who are either new to Islam, non-Muslims, or have very little knowledge, There's halaqats that the sheikh does for them, calls them in, and there's a little bit of tafsir, a little bit of this, a little bit of everything. And what that does is it piques your interest, but it allows you to dabble into different sciences. Now, after that, if now you think, okay, I want to be a little bit serious, then find an institute that go and research their culture. Go and sit in a class. I think that's very important. Managing expectations is extremely important. Go and, if you're concerned about, oh, will this be good for me? How will I fit in? That's important. People don't talk about this. The culture of the institute is as important as the studies. Because if you're not going to see eye to eye with everybody there, and you don't have something in common, you might feel like you're isolated. And that might leave a sour taste in your mouth. When we're not the way our parents' generation was. Young people now are very picky, subhanAllah, and they have lots of things that they need to take into consideration. So perhaps look at the culture, the philosophy of the organization, then move forward. And finally, last advice I would give is be a little open-minded. Not so much that you're a leaf in the wind, that you'll just get blown away, but at the same time, just because you've heard one set of scholarship does not mean that that's all there is. The Islamic scholarship is so vast, it would take a lifetime and you wouldn't only take a portion of it. Such is Islamic scholarship. So I think practically, you have to take practical advice. You have to look into the institution and make sure that the course is for you. For some people, it's part-time. For some people, it's a bit more. For some people, they can genuinely do full-time. And if they can, they should. Wallahu
Excellent. Very sage advice there. And
can I possibly just add a comment there?
Absolutely.
I mean, I just perhaps as a warning, I'm not a great fan of autodidacts. So people who are self-taught, I'm not a great fan when it comes to Islamic theology. There needs to be, just to echo what Sheikh Farhan said, you do have a foundation, a starting point. Perhaps you do read a bit and get interested on Islam, but then you need to sit at the feet of scholars and learn knowledge from them, and know that whatever you're learning from them, it isn't the ultimate and the only view in Islam. There are much more, and so many people have said so many things about that particular issue that you're talking about. So I just wanted to echo that kind of like self-taught thing, and as a warning to avoid.
I think it's a really good point. I think a lot of people do feel, especially once they've got some Arabic under their belt, that they can sit in a library and they can become a self-taught scholar, as you know. But you would never do that you'd never go to a self-taught doctor, would you?
No.
Well, I certainly wouldn't. And I think that's a fair warning. Having said that, there's a level which you can attain, as you mentioned before, both in English. There's a ceiling, of course, in English, but in Arabic as well, without having to sit at the feet of a scholar. But you just have to be cognizant that there is that ceiling. Because there will be people out there who want to study Islam who don't want to become scholars, don't want to become imams. They want to do it because they want to increase their Islamic learning. And that was one of the questions which we had through as well. And I guess that would be your advice to them as well.
Correct, absolutely. But even if they learn or study Islam, not for scholarship, but to pursue a scholarly career, but as a vocational subject, that's very admirable. And that's fine, whatever they can read. But one thing that they would find, just to go back to initial things that Sheikh Farhan said about you're not going to understand an advanced level tafsir if you don't have a foundational tafsir understanding. So there is that part of how much would self-taught Islamic studies get you, and where would that take you? So I hope that kind of makes sense.
And the route which Farhan you mentioned before, how would it differ, or would it differ if for a female? What choices are available to women to become scholars, to become well, not imams, but to become academically increasing their knowledge, not necessarily in a formal way, but if they just want to increase their learning? Are these institutes such as QMan, you mentioned Ibrahim College, etc., are they also open to women? Is Al Azhar open to women? Could you enlighten us on that?
Yeah, I think this is a really important discussion. Good question. I personally think as a ummah, as a community, we are lagging behind. Look, the woman, the mother, if I can use the word the mother, she is at the center of the household. If the mother is left ignorant, why do you expect your child? Why do you see so many ignorant children out there, right? Because we've neglected our sisters, we've neglected our mothers, we've neglected our daughters, right? We need to give them open access to education, and not just because they're going to become mothers, because our sisters and the women of the community have much to offer. I was grateful to study in Ibrahim College where both women and men were taught on par, although there was a division in the middle.
Sure.
Look, go back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time. In the masjid of the Prophet, there was no division. There was the men, there was the children, there was the women. In Salah, we have multiple examples where of muhaddithats, female scholars, right, who describe the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sitting on the pulpit. What comes to mind is the hadith of Tamim ad-Dari about, when the Tamim ad-Dari goes on a ship and he gets stranded on the island of Dajjal. That's narrated by a woman. She says that I heard the caller of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's masjid, the adhan give, the muaddin, the one who gives adhan. So I went to the mosque. I sat down. He then smiled. She describes his facial expressions. There was no division. There was no partition. Having said that, of course, at Ibrahim College, we had a partition because, young students, the community still needs to adapt and adjust to this. But the male teachers, female teachers would stand in the front and they would teach. Q Iman, where we teach, we have the exact same setting. We have a divider in the middle. Brothers and sisters, they're taught on par. In fact, in my final year, one of my teachers, Sister Sheikha Najah, she's an Azhari grad who at the time was doing a PhD in Oxford. She's looking at the link between Usul al-Fiqh and Ilm al-Kalam. She's currently a lecturer at Cambridge Muslim College.
Okay.
She taught us in our final, or I think was it penultimate year, she taught us mantiq. She was one of the best teachers we ever had. And everything was with respect, Ghaddul Basar, lowering the gaze, because that's the commandment, isn't it? Let the believing men lower the gaze and let the believing women cover themselves, not shove them in the closet. And then you wonder why your wives are, ill-informed, your children are ill-informed about the Sharia, about the deen. Where does this, subhanAllah, where does this come from, this culture? This is not an Islamic culture that we do not educate our women. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this, very passionate. I have a wife, I have a daughter. My wife studies at our place, right? I'm not just talking about young, even our mothers, aunties. There are so many who want to study, but the doors are shut. The doors of the masajid are shut. The doors of the madaris are shut. The Prophet ﷺ said, do not bar women from coming to the masjid. Whilst it's better for them to pray at home, it's more rewardable, you can't bar them either. Both have to be married up. Same thing with madaris. But you won't see this abroad as much. You go to Damascus, the women would happily walk into the men's area of the masjid. And this is from our teachers who studied in Damascus, they tell us this. They would sit in front of the imam, ask them questions. The imam would not bar them. I've seen this with my own eyes in Istanbul, where the women would come, they would ask questions from the imam would not bar them. So yes, we have to be careful. We have to be careful, I would say, word of caution, where we don't fall into a culture that's un-Islamic, but at the same time, this thing about ihtiyat, being overly cautious, or sadd al-dhara'i', which is a Maliki principle, blocking the means to haram, all of these have conditions to them. You've got to be careful how we approach this, because when our sisters then adopt views that we may not agree with, who's to blame? One of my teachers used to say, you're to blame, because you didn't educate them. And we should definitely, so our institutions, alhamdulillah, I can say most that I'm affiliated with, we would allow our sisters to come on, inshallah.
That's great. Thank you for
I'm
that.
sorry, if I can just, I won't take more than 30 seconds. If I can
carry on, please.
I probably slightly disagree with Sheikh Farhan in the sense that if you look at both in the United Kingdom, I can mention to you many institutions where there are facilities running parallel with male facilities for women, and I don't think that is much of an issue. You've got dedicated schools in Lancashire, in Nottingham, just for girls. In the Indo-Pak, I know in Bangladesh, Pakistan, in India, there are madaris for girls. So I think there are educational institutions, but the opportunities, I think the opportunities, are there enough opportunities like they are for men? I think that's probably where I would slightly disagree with Sheikh Farhan in that perspective.
Okay. Well, Dr. Saab, I wouldn't disagree with you. I would just say that's another point that needs to be dealt with. On the contrary, I actually agree with you. I think, yeah, definitely. To find, female scholarship after they've gone through the program, very challenging.
Yes, yes.
And they get, and the good ones, subhanAllah, anyone who's proficient, they get snapped up straight away.
Yeah.
Some institute will take them. So I completely agree with Dr. Saab that definitely that's an issue as well.
Excellent, thank you both. That's a really nice little exchange there, and I hope that's given some inspiration to the sisters who are listening, that in many instances there aren't barriers, or there shouldn't be barriers, and where they are, they seem to be coming down quicker than they were going up previously. We have about 5 minutes left, probably less than that now. I just want to ask Dr. Shahrul just a couple of things, possibly just to finish off on. One is, we've talked about access to knowledge, so I want you to talk a little bit about your library project for the people out there, which I think is a very important aspect of why I wanted you to be on the show. And the second thing is to break down some of the layman's terms, these titles, these imams, sheikhs, mushtahid, these kind of things. We hear a lot about people going to learning about Islam and they're getting ijaza. What does that mean? Are all our imams, when we are advised to go to our local imam to answer a question, are they all qualified? Is an imam a sheikh? Who should we turn to if I have a question on, something very specific, like adoption or abortion or some modern issue? Is my local imam the right person to go to? How do I find somebody who is qualified to answer these questions?
Thank you. Some excellent questions and quite a bit. So
a lot in 3 minutes, but do your best.
Okay, look, regarding the National Islamic Studies Library, this is a unique and the first of its kind in the United Kingdom. And I need an entire show to talk about it. So what I would tell your viewers to do is go onto our website, ibnrushd.org, Google us, okay, and you can see and read. It's got everything that you need to know about the National Islamic Studies Library. It's a fantastic and amazing project. Please, go onto the website and support us. Moving on to the titles, there are certain accolades, and these accolades do change. And I'm just going to try to take more than a minute or so. If I just take some, and then Sheikh Farhan perhaps can discuss some other ones. So let's just take a mujtahid. A mujtahid is the highest level of Islamic scholarship. There is no scholarship beyond the mujtahid. And I'm talking about mujtahid mutlaq, the highest level, because there are kind of 7 categories of mujtahid. So that's an independent scholar, completely independent, who is able to, has got complete mastery of Islamic disciplines. And those people don't exist now. That's the highest. It just doesn't exist, unfortunately, now, because the criteria for it is just so high. If we then go to something that's more relevant in our age, you've got the mufti. Now, I'll talk about the mufti and stop, and Sheikh Farhan can carry on from there, perhaps. Mufti, look, I think we've attenuated the value of mufti. This was a political post. It was selected by the rulers, the governors, to appoint certain people within a locality where people can go, a qualified scholar, to give advice and take Islamic rulings from that person. And this was something that people took or achieved after years of scholarship and studying with people and getting an ijaza, and a recognized traditional qualification or accreditation from somebody saying that person is qualified. So that's what a mufti is. And now, unfortunately, it's become like you do a 1 year or 2 year course and you've been given an iftar certificate. I'm just not a great fan of that. So that's where I'll stop. I'll pass it on to Sheikh Farhan. Perhaps he wants to say something else.
Go ahead. Yeah, there's about 2 minutes left.
There's a number of titles. Imam, Sheikh, Maulana. All of these titles mean something to someone in some place.
Yes.
I think the challenge is in the UK, what does it mean?
Yes.
We may not necessarily all see eye to eye as to what that means. Generally speaking, an imam is who? An imam is someone who leads salah. That does not mean that he has the skill set to deal with the vast problems of the community. Traditionally speaking, the imam was everything. The imam was not just the leader of the masjid, but he was part and parcel of the community, and he was someone who had great Islamic knowledge. Today, we've kind of reduced that down to just Imam Sahib lead salah. That's it, right?
Yes.
And unfortunately, we haven't empowered our imams. Part of that is the community's fault. Part of that is the perception of Islamic knowledge. The kind of zeal that people go into secular knowledge, that zeal doesn't, I think it's changing, but for a long time, it hasn't existed. So that skill set doesn't come about. Coming to the title Maulana, for example, Maulana
we have about 60 seconds left.
So Maulana is usually awarded to people who have gone through the Dars Nizami program from the subcontinent. They tend to be people who have a particular skill set, but again, you will not be recognized in the community as Maulana until you've done that level of work. And I would say the Arab counterpart of that is probably sheikh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. It was an absolutely fascinating discussion. I did warn both our guests that the hour will go by very quickly, as it did. It's a shame that this is unfortunately my last show for this Ramadan. I would have loved to have continued this discussion. Maybe we can do it at a different time. Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair, both to Dr. Shahrul and to Brother Farhan for your contributions. It was an absolutely fascinating discussion. It just leaves me to say thank you for everybody for listening to the Midday magazine over the course of this Ramadan. I pray the rest of your Ramadan goes well, and an early Eid Mubarak from me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.